Last question.
Thank you. Last question is The Times.
Thank you. Chris Smythe from The Times. Prime Minister, you've made clear your support for free trade, but is today's agreement essentially a recognition that in light of COVID, the growing threat of China and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that the era of unfettered globalization is over? And if so, the US has made clear that it thinks that requires a much more interventionist industrial policy to respond to that. Why do you think that approach is wrong for the UK? And Mr. President, what do you say to those abroad who say that your new Washington consensus is simply a fancier way of saying America first? And in light of the warm words just now about UK-US defence collaboration, particularly in Ukraine, do you think it's time for the first British NATO Secretary-General in 2 decades?
What's the last part of your question? I'm sorry?
Is it time for a British NATO Secretary-General?
Maybe. That remains to be seen. We're going to have to get a consensus within NATO to see that happen. They have a candidate who's a very qualified individual, but we're going to have we have a lot of discussion, not between us, but in NATO, to determine what the outcome of that will be. And with regard to the first part of your question you wanted me to respond to?
It was about, is the new Washington consensus that you and your National Security Advisor set out simply another way of saying America first, which some overseas think it is?
Well, look, my economic policy is totally consistent with what I think is in the interest of our NATO allies and our allies around the world. One of the things that I decided to do, and I find that the Wall Street Journal, and I'm sure there's someone here from the Wall Street Journal and other publications that are talking about Bidenomics. I didn't realize it was, I had Bidenomics going, but the bottom line was this, that the fundamental change is taking place in terms of international trade. Nobody at least very few people in the United States, and I suspect around the world, knew what a supply chain meant, what they were talking about with supply chain. When we found out during the pandemic that the reason why we couldn't build automobiles was because the outfit that we got our semiconductors from in Southeast Asia had shut down because of the pandemic, we realized that I decided that no longer would we rely on one center of support for any of the things that are needed for our economic growth. And I made it clear to all our NATO allies and our partners as well that although we were going to generate for example, an AI capacity here, a semiconductor capacity here in the United States, attracting literally several $100 billion in investment, that was available to all of our allies, all of our friends. And they're investing as we are and benefiting in a similar way. The bottom line here for me is that I think that the world is changing in a way that globalization is still real, but the measure of what we used to call in the United States trickle-down economics, where if the trickle-down economics resulted in both Democratic and Republican administrations for generations, in making sure we found the cheapest labor in the world, sent the work to that neighbor or those neighbors who have the cheapest labor, and they send back their products. Well, I'm not doing that anymore. We're going to make sure that we in fact have a flip of that. We're sending capacity here in the United States. We're attracting capacity to build here in the United States and send product overseas. Not the reverse. And I know it sounds simplistic, but it's working so far. And it's not going to hurt any of our allies or friends in terms of the trade piece of this. Matter of fact, I'm finding they're benefiting from it as well because they're engaging in it with us. And at home, they're doing similar things. So that's why we talked about the need to have relationships in terms of certain materials, the battery technologies, the share. We rely on Great Britain to produce a lot of that for us. So it is increasing trade, but right now it looks like it is because the United States is doing so incredibly well. It makes it look like it's only the United States. It's not. It's a change in direction in terms of how we view generating economic growth.